evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight, the defining principle of the American legal system, really of American life, the principle that has kept us free, is equal justice. And the principle is fairly simple. No matter what you look like or who your parents were or what your politics might be, the law treats you exactly the same way as it would any other American. In this country, justice is blind. Now, that's a lofty standard, but because Americans have long believed in fairness, and because most of the people in charge of administering that system have behaved in good faith, this country has, for the most part, lived up to its core ideal for 250 years, making it the greatest country in the world. But the populist surge of 2016 changed everything. Permanent Washington suddenly felt more threatened by its own voters, by American voters, than by any foreign adversary. Donald Trump, to them, seemed more dangerous than ISIS. They panicked. And in their panic, our leaders decided to turn the American legal system, as well as the American intel agencies, and if necessary, the U.S. Army, against their political opponents. They felt they had no choice. In doing this, they abandoned the ancient principle of equality under the law, and they replaced it with what is effectively a loyalty oath. Opponents of the regime became enemies of the state. That's a huge change, and you're seeing the results of that change tonight. Just 24 hours after a Manhattan grand jury indicted Joe Biden's rival in the next presidential race, another jury, also in New York, convicted a Republican social media influencer called Douglas Mackey. What did Mackey do wrong? Well, Douglas Mackey's crime was mocking Hillary Clinton voters online. You're seeing on your screen the meme that Mackey posted on Twitter during the 2016 election. In that meme, Mackey suggests it's possible to vote for president by text message, because only Hillary voters could be stupid enough to believe something so absurd. But of course, in real life, no one did believe that. Mackey's insult did not alter a single vote in the election, and no one has proved otherwise. The government brought forth not a single victim of this crime. It couldn't. Douglas Mackey was joking. Nobody believed he was a federal election official. And in fact, his social media profile pictured a Donald Trump hat. It was unmistakable. This was mockery. But in the wake of the 2016 election and the rising hysteria about Donald Trump, mocking the Democratic Party became a crime. So as a result, tonight, Douglas Mackey faces 10 years in prison. The case against Doug Mackey is the most shocking attack on freedom of speech in this country in our lifetimes. It's also a useful lesson in who will be allowed to speak going forward. As it turns out, a woman called Christina Wong posted an almost identical meme the same year, back during the 2016 election. But unlike Doug Mackey, Wong voted for Hillary Clinton. "Hey, Trump supporters," she wrote, "skip poll lines and text in your vote." Same crime. But the Department of Justice under Joe Biden has shown no interest in prosecuting Christina Wong. Do you see how this works? Have you internalized our new partisan legal standards? That would be the point of the exercise. They want you to know the rules. We'll have more on the Doug Mackey case and what it means for you and for America in just a moment. And by the way, Douglas Mackey is not the only Trump supporter who is now going to prison because of how he voted. According to new reporting from Julie Kelly, the FBI's Counterterrorism Division just arrested a grandmother in the state of Virginia on 4 misdemeanors this week. What exactly did she do? She entered the Capitol with her elderly mother for a total of 15 minutes on January 6th. She hurt no one. She destroyed nothing. She just stood there. And yet, at the very same time, during the very same week, none of the transgenderist thugs who invaded the Tennessee State House yesterday have been rounded up by the FBI Counterterror Division. And of course, they won't be. Joe Biden just honored them with a Trans Day of Visibility. So what we're watching here, unmistakably, is bigger than Donald Trump. But we're going to begin tonight with the latest on his case. And we're doing that because he is, and this is not at all incidental to his prosecution, he is the leading Republican candidate for president. Now, Trump apparently is being charged not with treason or insurrection or collusion or even shoplifting, but with something much smaller. A slew of process crimes relating to a payment he apparently made 7 years ago. In no fair system would that be a crime under the law 7 years later. But the Soros-funded district attorney in Manhattan, Alvin Bragg, has stitched together a Frankenstein legal theory to justify this prosecution. Under normal circumstances, it would be impossible because the statute of limitations has passed. And as if all of that were not third world enough, someone leaked the news of Donald Trump's grand jury indictment to the media. Now, that in itself is a crime under the law in New York. In fact, a much bigger crime than those under which Donald Trump is being charged. Will Alvin Bragg prosecute the leaker? Please. It's almost certainly someone in his own office. Nor will Bragg prosecute, as many people have pointed out today, the crimes of Hunter Biden or other Democratic partisans. Those aren't rare or hard to find. Bragg will not prosecute Hillary Clinton, even though she just admitted to violating campaign finance law by paying for the fake Russian dossier. What's fascinating is that none of this has alerted the watchdogs to government abuse, our media. No, just the opposite. The media are cheerleading our new standards of tribal justice. Watch.
The good news is here, it's our legal system in action saying nobody is above the law.
Nobody's above the law, not Republicans and not Democrats, not Donald Trump, not anybody.
I tend to think that nobody is above the law.
No person above the law.
We have political leaders who are not above the law.
We don't believe that anybody should be above the law.
They were all beating the same drum, if you will. No one is above the law.
No one is above the law. Today's evidence is that that includes Trump as well.
New life has been breathed into that saying, no person is above the law.
Let's be completely clear. None of the people you just saw care a thing about justice. Let that word burn in their mouths. No, they are obviously bloodthirsty. They would cheer as you were necklaced in the street. No one is above the law, they would scream as you writhed on the ground. They would. But as long as they're still pretending that the old standards of fairness and equal application of the law apply, then whatever happened to Sam Bankman-Fried? Remember him? Largest financial crime in history? To this day, no one has explained or bothered to even try to tell us how Sam Bankman-Fried was able to make his bail. That was set at $250 million. All that has been disclosed to us, the long-suffering public, is that a former dean at Stanford and a Stanford computer scientist put up $500,000 and $200,000 respectively, and his parents put up the value of their home. So that leaves quite a big gap. Where did the rest of the money come from? No one will tell us. No one in the media is asking because no one cared. Sam Bankman-Fried didn't pay off a former mistress. No, he defrauded 1 million people and ran off with houses in the Bahamas, and yet the system is protecting him because he voted correctly. That's remarkable. But he's not the only criminal that Washington refuses to prosecute. There are so many of them. The people who destroyed the U.S. dollar, for example. The ones who degraded the United States military and turned it into a joke, which it is. The ones who flooded rural America with opioids and killed hundreds of thousands. The people currently selling our oil reserves to China. None of them have ever been prosecuted. In fact, they've all been promoted. We'll have more on them in just a moment. But for now, we'd like to start with Donald Trump, the Republican frontrunner who's been indicted for non-existent crimes in the middle of a presidential race. We have a very specific question about how this is going to affect the race, because, of course, affecting the race is the entire point. Harmeet Dillon has followed all of this closely from the inside. She's the founder of the Dillon Law Group. Harmeet, thanks so much for coming on tonight. So let's start with a specific question germane to the race in which Donald Trump is engaged. He's the frontrunner by 30 points. You have seen cases, politicized cases, as with Roger Stone, in which the person charged is gagged by the judge and not allowed to speak about the charges. This is increasingly common in violation of the First Amendment, obviously, but it happens. If this happens to Donald Trump, he will lose his free speech rights as a candidate in a presidential race. And I'm just wondering if you think that could potentially happen.
Well, it very much could happen. In fact, we've seen it talked about on television already. And in fact, the president has been subject to former president, subject to similar allegations in other litigation that he's involved in, also way beyond the statute of limitations. The story is that because he says mean things about people sometimes on his free speech platforms, that he should not be allowed to speak about a fundamental issue of due process that governs the future of our country and how we look at justice and how we look at the politicization of this political process. And so that would be a gross miscarriage of justice if it occurs, and I would not be surprised to see this politicized prosecutor make that request of this judge.
I honestly think it's impossible to imagine greater election interference, a greater or more aggressive attack on our democracy than gagging a presidential candidate in a presidential year. I mean, Vladimir Putin has never dreamed of any attack on the United States more damaging than that. Would anyone be able to stop it?
Well, certainly the lawyers in this case will argue against that, and it may be the kind of issue that they seek an immediate appeal on if they lose. But at the end of the day, if a court sets those rules, then, a litigant has to abide by them or be in contempt of court. And, that itself would be a very dangerous course to pursue. And so,
yes,
no matter which way you cut it, this entire case, from its inception to its continuation to its now being brought to fruition, what we hear from the New York Times, not from anything that the DA's office has told the defense team, is that there are 30-plus charges. We don't know what they are. The New York Times knows what they are. And so this is not the way that justice is meant to go in the United States. And what I'm afraid of, Tucker, is that this isn't just going to be about Donald Trump. It's going to undermine all citizens' confidence in the rule of law in this country. And that is really tragic.
Yeah, it is. And it has far-reaching and lasting generational consequences that I don't think anyone's thought through. Harmeet Dillon, I appreciate your wise and measured perspective as always. Thank you.
Thank you.
So you have to ask, given that our entire system has been subverted to stop this one guy from becoming president again, or from serving effectively as president when he had the office, what is this about? Why do they monomaniacally hate Donald Trump so much? Oh, he's obnoxious, he's racist. Okay, right. It's not about that. Here's what it's actually about. Donald Trump challenged the reigning foreign policy orthodoxies as president. He infuriated the neocons who control the State Department and the Pentagon. When he briefly paused arms sales to sacred Ukraine, they impeached him for it. When he ordered troops out of Syria, as was his constitutional right as commander-in-chief, the Pentagon just ignored him. So it's hard not to see Trump's current indictment as an effort to make sure that he can never do anything like that again. He can never tamper with the one thing they care about most, which is their foreign policy, a foreign policy that has not served this country, which has in fact weakened it. Stephen Miller is a former senior advisor to Donald Trump. He's founder of America First Legal. He joins us tonight to assess. Stephen Miller, I just wonder what you think of that. I sort of came to that after watching this Trump saga for the last 7 years. That seems to be the third rail, really, is the foreign policy questions.
Yes, and I lived through it, Tucker. I lived through it by this man's side for those 7 years. The moment that he got the nomination, we watched as the hidden power centers in this country came out from underneath their rocks and began to pull the strings that they control. They began to leak information designed to sabotage him at every turn. They began to use every organ of control they have in the intelligence community, the national security community, the law enforcement community, to try to control him and to control his presidency. Russia is the central example of this. They tried desperately to keep him from pursuing détente with Russia. They tried desperately to keep him from holding that summit with Vladimir Putin, to try to have a relationship between our two countries. Now look what has happened. Now that he is out of office, we are on the brink of a world war, Tucker. As soon as they pushed him out of office, look what happened. We are now almost in a nuclear conflict over the borders of Ukraine. So you ask me, what is Donald Trump's crime? We know it's not a financial crime. We know it's not a campaign finance crime. His crime is refusing to bow or bend to the corrupt and rotten foreign policy establishment that is used to always getting their way in this country.
And that has much greater control over our system than I think any of us appreciate. I mean, you look at John Cornyn, the Republican senator from Texas, who I think most people, I'll speak for myself, sort of assumed he was kind of conservative. And then you realize, when you view it through the lens of what's happening in Ukraine, John Cornyn and Mitch McConnell and Tom Tillis and almost every Republican senator is a screaming liberal, actually. And if it weren't for foreign policy, you wouldn't know that. You wouldn't know that they are completely aligned with Chuck Schumer and the Democrats and Joe Biden. So there really is a uniparty on the most important questions.
Well, there's obviously an ideological disease that courses through Washington when it comes to foreign policy and the sacrifice of our interest to foreign nations and foreign profits. But it's even deeper than that. And I know this because I also worked on the Hill for almost a decade. The intelligence community is able to manipulate the intelligence process and their relationship with lawmakers in order to obtain the answers that they want from Congress. So when it comes to an issue like the Patriot Act, they can leak what they need to leak, they can push the narratives they need to push, they can manufacture the threats they need to manufacture, and they can work the relationships that they have in order to obtain the outcome that they want. And that has always been true on foreign policy for many, many, many years. Then Donald Trump comes up onto the scene of Washington, a man with whom they have no relationship, a man who has no affinity for them, who doesn't care about them, who doesn't value what they value. And this, for them, is a panic moment. It is a panic moment. And we are now living in the 7th year of that panic, turning our entire democracy upside down. And I will tell you, if a prosecutor in Manhattan can take control of our entire presidential election process, then by what definition can we say that we even have a democracy in this country?
Right. No, I mean, we were mocked, I thought, justly by the president of El Salvador yesterday, who said, we're not going to take any more lectures about democracy from a country that interferes in its own elections like this. And unfortunately, he's right. He is. Stephen Miller, great to see you tonight. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So again, the irony in everything is irony at this point is that they've been lecturing us for many years about election interference, but you're watching it happen right in front of you. The prosecution of Donald Trump is election interference. He's the Republican frontrunner. Leaks about his imminent arrest began coming out on March 17th. That was just 24 hours after the House Oversight Committee traced $1 million in payments from China to several members of Joe Biden's immediate family. Kind of weird that no one's talking about that now. And the insurrection that happened yesterday in Tennessee and so many other things. So we thought we'd bring in Miranda Devine, a cool-headed reporter from the New York Post who has been on this China cash story since day one. She joins us now. Miranda, thanks so much for coming on. Remind us of this story, which has been lost in the noise, if you would.
Well, this was a bombshell revelation that came from the House Oversight Committee headed by James Comer. And they've been methodically chasing down the money trail from China and other countries to Biden family coffers. And what they found was with one of these payments, a $1 million payment from China, it went through a proxy intimate of the Biden family and then was parceled out to 4 different family members, there being Hunter Biden, his uncle Jim Biden, and his sister-in-law, Hallie Biden, who's the widow of Hunter's late brother with whom he had an affair. And so then there's another account as well with an unnamed Biden. And this money was parceled out over 3 months, 15 different tranches to disguise it so that it didn't look like what it was, which was a bribe from China. Big story. First time we've really seen flesh on the bones of the money trail. And it was just buried within 24 hours because somebody leaked the story to the media that Trump was about to be arrested. And so all we've seen 24/7 since then is news about Trump. And that works for the Democrats. It works for Joe Biden. You remember in 2020, he hid in the basement and beat Donald Trump because he was had the excuse of COVID. And in 2024, he won't have the excuse of COVID, but what he will have is the excuse of numerous of these Trump legal prosecutions, you know, politicized prosecutions, obviously, and that will just bury any bad news after 4 years of his administration stuffing up pretty much everything that they touch. But we don't hear news about that, and all the other scandals that the House Republicans have uncovered in the last 2 weeks, everything, you know, from the border to more of these Biden scandals to Anthony Fauci's lies, none of it gets any oxygen because Donald Trump is just like crack cocaine to the networks, to the left-wing media. And we also know that if there are any sort of legal outcomes, any accountability that comes for Joe Biden over his family's influence peddling scheme, it will just be dismissed as tit for tat. The Republicans just attacking Donald Trump, attacking Joe Biden on behalf of Donald Trump.
Boy, this country used to be filled with reporters like you, honest and dogged. You're one of the last, and I hope you're rewarded for it someday. Miranda Devine of the New York Post, thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So as we told you just a moment ago, the single most brazen attack on the First Amendment, your right to have opinions that differ from those of the people in charge, the single most brazen attack ever in our lifetimes from the Biden administration, which is about to send a man to prison for 10 years for making fun of Hillary Clinton. That was his crime. More on that case next. The Douglas Mackey case we told you about at the top of the show really does seem like a turning point for the country. The hallmark of a free society is freedom of speech. You can say what you believe. You don't have to hide what's on your conscience. And above all, you can mock the people in charge. They have to take it because it's not their country. They share it with you. It belongs to all of us. But the hallmark of tyrants is a total lack of sense of humor, for one, and an utter intolerance for dissent. And so to see a man sent to 10 years in prison, and that's what Doug Mackey is facing in the wake of his conviction today, for making fun of Hillary Clinton, and then to see Hillary Clinton herself remain silent. Hillary Clinton apparently is okay with sending a man to prison for 10 years for making fun of her. If you've ever wondered whether she's a cruel and horrible person, the answer is yes, she is. And to see the media remain silent in the face of the most basic of all human rights being violated like this, it lets you know they're on the side of the U.S. government, the Biden administration, punishing people for mocking the party in charge with 10 years in prison. We're not overstating this. We don't think we're getting overheated. We really think this is a pivot point in the history of the United States. Molly Hemingway is editor-in-chief of The Federalist. She joins us with her reaction to what we're seeing in the Doug Mackey. Molly, thank you so much for coming on. I'm not sure I've seen anything scarier than this.
It's pathetic and sick that this was ever even investigated, that it was prosecuted, and that there are people in New York who care so little about the things that make our country unique that they would vote to convict this person. You know, it just seems like we don't have a country, we don't have rules, we don't have laws. The only thing we have is whether you're with the regime or against the regime.
That's
and
right.
If you're with the regime, you can do anything. You can lay siege to the White House and injure 60 Secret Service officers. You can lay siege to a federal courthouse in Oregon for months. You can burn down cities. You can, create the Russia collusion hoax, and you'll get awards for it. You can come up with a smear, false about, a justice, someone who's nominated to the Supreme Court being a serial gang rapist, and nothing will happen to you. You can even make jokes about when to vote and how to vote on Election Day. We see that all the time from people on the left. But if you're on the right, if you upset the regime, all bets are off and anything can happen.
They're breaking the uniparty, I would say, because almost no Republicans have stood up for Doug Mackey today, just for the record. Some have, but very few. The people in charge in Washington are breaking so many things completely, so many fundamental systems that have kept this country afloat and allowed it to thrive for hundreds of years. So you sort of wonder, what do they think the next stage is here? If you put people in prison for making fun of Hillary Clinton, what happens next?
It is really remarkable how much has been destroyed because of the left's refusal to accept in 2016 that people did not support the candidate that they supported. They're willing to burn everything down. They're willing to destroy the country. They're willing to break every precedent and norm because they're still having this temper tantrum, and they are fearful that the people might still have a say in it. But that's precisely what needs to happen, is that the people need to have a say. They need to be able to oust these people from office and positions of power. They need to get their country back. What we have is so precious. What we had is so precious here, from First Amendment protections to an understanding of constitutional due process. And we cannot let people's hatred and obsession take that away from us.
And where are the leaders of the Republican Party? I mean, where's George W. Bush and Jeb Bush and Karl Rove and all the people who are lecturing us on the op-ed page of the Wall Street Journal about what we should do and not do? They're all welcome on the show anytime to stand up against the destruction of the First Amendment. I haven't heard any of them even weigh in on this, and certainly not with outrage, which is warranted.
People need to speak loudly, and people need to understand how serious the threats are that we're facing right now, and how when you see this happening in other countries, this type of persecution of people, bad things happen, and people who care about this country should speak loudly about it.
I agree with that. Have to. In this case, and by the way, anyone who doubts its significance, look at the details. And I think any clean conscience, any decent person will be shocked by what the government did today. Molly Hemingway, thank you so much for that. So, as the Republican frontrunner in the presidential race gets indicted on fake charges, Washington refuses to prosecute Democrats who commit felonies that actually have changed the country forever, really hurt the country. People like Toria Nuland, who has brought us to the brink of a nuclear war. What about people like that? We'll consider it next. The hallmark of tyranny is the total distortion of justice. Differences of opinion become felonies for which you can be imprisoned, while actual crimes are described as just business as usual, the way that we do things. And so even as we're trying to throw people in prison for criticizing the Democratic Party, we are allowing people who've hurt this country profoundly to ascend up the ladder of success. There are a million examples of this, but we pick one tonight. Toria Nuland, who's one of the leaders of the State Department, the architect, by the way, of our current war with Russia, was also the architect of the war in Iraq. Now, that war began under false pretenses. More than 1 million people died for no reason, and it destroyed ancient Christian communities in Iraq. Before the war, there were about 1.5 million Christians in that country. Now just a few 100,000 are left. But Nuland was never held to account for any of this. In fact, she was praised, and then she was promoted. So she went back into government service, and she was caught on tape orchestrating a coup in Ukraine. We're not making this up. Here's the tape from 2014.
Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, what he needs is Cleach and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week, I just think Cleach going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay.
So that's the lady who lectures us about democracy, subverting democracy in a foreign country, getting caught, and then getting an even better job, and then pushing another pointless war on our country, this one against Russia. She's one of the architects of this war. Nuland is driving this nation into a conflict against both Russia and China. We can't win that war. We will lose that war. It will destroy our country. But Toria Nuland has never been punished for any of this. Once again, she's been promoted. The destruction that she has wrought is really almost beyond fiction. Here she is bragging about blowing up critical infrastructure in Europe. Watch.
Senator Cruz, like you, I am, and I think the administration is very gratified to know that Nord Stream 2 is now, as you like to say, a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea.
That's just disgusting. And yet no one says a word about it. What does it take to get indicted in Washington? Well, if you're Toria Nuland, of course, you know you will never be indicted for anything. You'll get some sort of glass ceiling breaking award for women at the State Department. In Washington, you only risk indictment and punishment if you dare to criticize people like Toria Nuland. And that's the real lesson of what's happening to Donald Trump and his supporters. Their real sin was opposing the people in charge, and particularly in opposing their foreign policy.